I've been pouring my heart and soul into developing my dream game Infernomon. Things like pet collections, RTS style battling, auto-generated dungeons, professions, inventory systems, boss fights, and more. But then I hit a wall. Something happened that caused me to change course a little bit and go on a bit of a detour, but that's actually got me really excited. But before spoiling that, let's go on a bit of a recap to what my original vision for Infernomon was. Starting with what I'd gotten done, or at least started on, followed by what I was planning to do next. So starting with what I've done so far, you could form a team of 3, you, a witch, or a wizard, and 2 Infernomon from your collection. One of the core features of the game is conjuring, where you repeatedly create Infernomon of your own and hope they come with the stats and attacks you want. You control all 3 characters at once with this sort of simplified RTS style movement where you can select one or many team members and tell them where to move and tell them what to attack. I began building attacks for the player and starter Infernomon. Some of the attacks did single target damage, some did multi-target damage, some did poison damage over time, etc. And there were attack effects like lowering accuracy, stunning, pushing enemies away, or inflicting burns. I'd started implementation on adding battle roles such as assassin, tank, support, and utility that each served a different function in battle. Each Infernomon had different elemental typings like you would see in a game like Pokemon that provide this kind of rock, paper, scissors style gameplay where certain Infernomon have advantages over other Infernomon. I'd started building the first dungeon in my game, which was earth themed that had a boss at the end of the dungeon. Your player and Infernomon characters also could hold items called pendants that have unique abilities such as causing your attacks to chain damage to nearby enemies. Although I hadn't yet gotten around to building the item mechanics yet, your player character could equip gear such as a hat, robe, wand, and staff. I had a very basic version of school professions working, which included enchanting, potion making, and gem crafting. Enchanting would let you power up your player's gear even further. Potion making would let you make potions that you could use in battle that provide stat buffs, and gem crafting allows you to beef up your pendants with the stats you prefer. I'd now like to go over what I haven't even started, and as I do that I have a chart here to help you visualize where I was with all my progress, showing things that I have completed in green, what was in progress in yellow, and how close I was to finishing it, and also what I hadn't even started in red. So at this point, I hadn't even spent much time on developing a storyline. I hadn't created any NPC dialogues. I had no quest system, no achievements. I also had recently got an idea from a friend about doing a school year system that I really liked and wanted to do, which consists of things like in-game days where only a certain amount of actions can be done in a day, a daily rotation of school classes, and then rewards for completing each semester and each year. I was also planning on doing battle power-ups, kind of like you would see in roguelikes like Vampire Survivors, which I'll be talking about later, so make sure to stick around. So at this point, given that I only work on the game part-time, it's safe to say that I'm probably not even halfway through developing, but now I'm going to take you a week back in time to when I had a reality check. I was sitting in my office editing a YouTube video that I was planning to release instead of this video, which kind of sucks because I was like 70% done with that video. It was going to be a video going into more detail about Infernomon progress to date, but I decided to take a break from editing that video and browse YouTube. I saw a video of DevDuck, who is a popular indie dev YouTuber, talking about how he took a break from his main passion project to make a small game, and he had this to say.
The twist for this year is that I want to set myself a bit of a challenge to do something I've never done before. That challenge will be to release a project on Steam before I return to work on Dolphin. Is that I just want to do something I've never done before in getting a game across the finish line on Steam. There's a lot that I think I will learn from creating my developer account, setting up a store page, and ultimately going through the release process that will serve me very well when it comes time to release Dolphin in the future.
At this point, I realized he was completely correct and that I should focus on making a small game instead of risking making a giant game and spending multiple more years and risking having a failed release. But instead of releasing a completely different game from Infernomon, I'm choosing to just scale back Infernomon to a smaller game so I can have a quicker initial release, and then from there I will release small incremental updates to include all of the features that I was originally going to include in the first release. So now let's talk about my new path forward and what I plan to change from my original vision of Infernomon. One primary difference is I'm turning towards a more roguelike survivor game instead of a dungeon crawler, which should allow me to speed up my development. So instead of traversing a dungeon and moving from room to room, you will now stay in one room and battle through endless waves of enemies. Another difference is the way leveling up works. Instead of leveling up outside of battle, you will now start at level 1 at the beginning of each dungeon run, and you will level up during battle. The only caveat is that you can still power up your Infernomon outside of battle with a system called Infernomon Mastery, which is pretty simple. The more you use an Infernomon species in battle, the stronger it becomes each time you battle. So even though you start at level 1 in each dungeon run, the higher your Infernomon's mastery score, the stronger they will be at level 1 when you start that dungeon. Another big change is the way playstyle and attacks will work for each Infernomon. So instead of Infernomon having 4 attacks with every attack being unique and varying in damage, attack ranges, effects, and cooldowns, they will now just have 2 basic attacks that all do the same thing for every Infernomon, but can be altered during a dungeon run using power-ups. We'll first talk about the attack changes and then we'll cover power-ups. So like I said, each Infernomon will have 2 attacks. The first basic attack is the primary attack, which matches the Infernomon's primary elemental typing, and a secondary attack which matches their secondary typing. If the Infernomon doesn't have a secondary typing, their second attack will just be normal typing. But here's the catch. Every Infernomon can alter their secondary attack during battle. So for example, let's say you're fighting in the Earth dungeon, and you bring Chiropter, who is fire and flying type. This means his 2 attacks will be fire and flying. Since fire is Chiropter's primary type, his fire attack cannot change, but we will have the option to change his secondary attack during the dungeon run through power-ups. So now let's talk about power-ups. For those of you familiar with roguelikes, as you progress through a battle, you will periodically come across power-ups. So for example, maybe I will make it so each time you level up, you get to select from one of 3 randomly selected power-ups. So let's say Chiropter levels up in battle and is provided these 3 random options to choose from. 1, increase the range of your attacks by 10%, 2, increase movement speed by 10%, or 3, change your secondary attack type to Blight. So going back to our scenario where Chiropter is battling in the Earth dungeon, it may be advantageous to select the 3rd power-up since Earth Infernomon are weak to Blight attacks. So those are just some examples of power-ups. Other power-ups might be things like attacks do area damage, increase projectile speed, attacks shoot multiple projectiles, shields that absorb damage and regenerate over time, increased health, and things like that. Also, similar to Infernomon Mastery, where you power up your Infernomon outside of battle, you'll also be able to do the same thing with your power-ups. So shifting away from my plan to have Infernomon have a variety of unique attacks and just starting out with 2 basic attacks that can be altered through power-ups, this will save me a bunch of programming time since I don't have to individually program each attack for every single Infernomon. I just have to build one attack, and that can be reused for both the primary and secondary attack. And then I only have to program each power-up just once, and it can be reused by every single Infernomon. Another big change is to the way attacking will work. So before in my game, you would select a character on your team, and then select the enemy which you wanted to attack, which is fine if there isn't a ton of enemies, but now I plan to have a lot more enemies spawn at once, and so always having to manually click your target could get really annoying. So to make battling feel more user-friendly, I'm now going to make it feel sort of like selecting an attack option in a tower defense game. For those of you that aren't familiar with tower defense games, all this means is that each character on my team will have a different attack option, such as nearest, meaning your Infernomon automatically attack the nearest thing to it, weakest, meaning they attack the enemy with the least health, strongest, meaning they attack the enemy with the most health, and then type advantage, which means they find any possible enemies that are weak to one of their attacks and then attack that Infernomon. You'll also have these 2 kind of territory options is what I'm referring to them as. The first is control, meaning they will go to where you tell them and they don't move and they only attack what's within their attack range, and aggressive, meaning they will move anywhere they have to around the map to find a target to attack. So now let's get into some things that I will be removing for my initial release, but could make it back into the game through updates. So the first thing, I'm holding off on doing player gear. This is something that would have taken up a decent amount of time and money designing the icons, updating the character sprite animations to display their equipped gear, and additional gameplay balancing. So all that progress I made last month building an inventory UI for gear is now going to be put on the back burner. I'm also holding off on doing pendants, aka held items. I am holding off on doing professions, quests, achievements, and also boss fights, which will now be simplified. So instead of a boss fight happening at the end of a dungeon run, since dungeon runs are now endless waves of enemies, I'm thinking boss fights will just spawn like once every 10th wave or something like that, and just having bosses to have basic attacks just like any other Infernomon, with the main difference being they just have a ton more health than the average enemy. I'm also holding off on doing the school year system since that could end up taking a bunch of time. But there is one feature that I am on the fence about, whether to include it in my initial release or not, and that is Infernomon abilities. So taking away individual attacks for each Infernomon kind of takes away a lot of their uniqueness. So abilities could be a way to still scale back a little bit from my old attack system, but not completely. So to give you an idea of how abilities could work, for example, Genishroom and Druvishroom are both support Infernomon. Their ability could be that they drop mushrooms that when picked up by allies increase their attack power by 20% for 10 seconds. Or maybe Infernomon like Munusmog and Abumog, they could release toxic chemicals that damage enemies that are close to them. I think unique Infernomon abilities would be really awesome, so let me know in the comments if you think it'd be worth including those in the initial release of the game. Although that would push the release date back a little bit, I think it could be worth it, so let me know what you guys think. So that concludes my list of things that would have taken months and months, at least of part-time development, to build. And while it's sad they won't make it into the initial release, I'm very excited about getting something playable as soon as possible. This will allow me to get feedback from players early on and can gradually release the things that I want back in future updates. So that is all I have for now. After releasing this video, the next thing I'm going to start working on is simplifying the attack systems in my game and building out the system where you just have your primary and secondary attacks. After that, I'll focus on updating movement and the enemy targeting system where they target the nearest, strongest, weakest, etc. Infernomon. From there, you can expect me to continue releasing videos, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you can follow me on my game dev journey. Thanks for watching.